We're going to be discussing Trump's first 30 days, including his first executive order of defunding the WHO. The farmers, are they losing income? What about IVF? And what is all the hoopla about RFK being elected for or nominated for the Human Health and Human Services? Today, we're going to talk about it from a naturopathic doctor's perspective. This is kind of my first time talking about politics, so I just ask that we have some pros and cons, and that's how life works, okay? I'm going to kind of stick to the things health-oriented, and I'm going to start with the first thing that Trump did that I was very pleased by, defunding the WHO. I know people are going to be a little upset that I think that that is a good thing. The reason I think that this is a good thing is a couple of reasons. One, the United States, has been the biggest funder of the WHO. Almost 15% of their budget comes exclusively from the United States. That's interesting to me, given that we're not the biggest country that gets the benefit from this. The other piece of this is there's two nonprofit foundations that have historically funded the WHO. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the biggest funder just after the United States. And historically, the Rockefeller Foundation, Andrew Rockefeller, the oil tycoon, was one of the big funders of the WHO, the World Health Organization. Okay, what does this have anything to do with health, and why is a naturopathic doctor even commenting on this? Well, I will say this. The United States has really had a hard time with its own health crises, okay? 1 in 4 Americans is on an antidepressant. 2/3 of pharmaceuticals are consumed in the United States, and we're 1 billion people less than China and India. Pharmaceutical medications are very expensive, and the United States gets crazy prices for them, and then we offset them to the citizens of the United States. While I understand that there are AIDS clinics and HIV clinics that have lost funding because of this, I say, let someone else pick up the slack for a moment. And also, we need congressional approval for this executive order to happen. One other reason I really care about the WHO being defunded is to me, it's an organization that is corrupt. It's much like with the Department of Government Efficiency. There are pros and cons there too, but one of the benefits there is seeing all the money that's spent inappropriately. I want to see the WHO's budget. I want to see line item for line item what they are spending, where they're sending money, because I suspect that some of that money that they are sending to countries that need aid support, which there hasn't been much change there, by the way, as far as like the amount of people getting diagnosed and kids getting diagnosed, so where is the money going and how is it helping those people? It doesn't seem like it's solving the problem. I want to see a problem solved. And the WHO is not solving those problems. They're just putting Band-Aids on things. Okay? One other piece of this. The United States had the highest mortality rate from COVID. Okay? This is the main reason why Trump wanted to defund the WHO. And the big problem is the pandemic preparedness, which would have global effect, meaning the United States is part of the WHO. Then now the WHO decides, there's another pandemic, which watch, there will be another one. Don't you worry. They keep trying to scare tactic us into this, that, and the other thing. I think the United States needs to be on its own 2 feet. We have a different country. We're not surrounded by, we only have 2 neighbors. We have Mexico and Canada. We don't have anybody else surrounding us. We're not like Germany that's surrounded by a bunch of other countries. So we need to take our own consideration. And while playing nice with our neighbors and our large global community is important, having another organization, like I said, that is likely has fraud and is corrupt, be in control of the United States, I am not a fan of at all. And so for that, I am grateful that Trump decided to cancel the WHO. Like I said before, let's keep an open mind because everything has pros and cons. Let's move on to this piece of what Trump has done is not something I'm super stoked about because it really negatively affects my community. Where I live in Colorado is hugely agricultural community. We have a lot of farmers. We have a lot of ranchers. We have a lot of immigrants that come and work on these farms and ranches. So there's 2 pieces here. Every year in Montrose, we have the Soil, Food, and Farm Forum that happens at the end of January. And there was a farmer that was on one of the panels, and he gave some talks. Roy P., I'll call him. I'm not remembering his last name because it's some crazy Polish last name, so forgive me. He was cited in some of the articles I was reading as one of the farmers on the Front Range that was losing aid because of the funding freeze, and that's a big problem. So as corrupt as USAID seems to have been with all of their, extreme budget line items, it also was doing some funding for some of our farmers here, even locally in Colorado. And Roy has been one of the recipients of some of those grants. And here's the problem. Farming isn't a big cost. Like the profit margin that most farmers get is not much, if any, that they have. And that's a huge problem. And I hope for that to change. We're willing to pay $15 for a cocktail or $4 for a soda, but then we get all huffy when we say $5 for a pound of broccoli. It's like, well, let's talk about how much effort it takes to grow that broccoli. And we have giant corporations that are bottling the soda for us, and we have giant corporations that are bottling the vodka for our vodka tonic or whatever it is that we're getting at some fancy cocktail bar. Like, our priorities in the United States have shifted in a way that is not beneficial for our health. So, bringing it back to the farmers, I'm willing to pay $5 a pound for broccoli because it's worth it to be more nutrient dense for my family. Plus, then I'm supporting my community, a farmer that I know and can talk to and say, hey, bud, thank you so much for producing this broccoli for my family. In Colorado, too, which there are fantastic broccoli producers in Colorado. To be surprised. Let's talk a little bit about the immigration bit. While I'm not a fan of undocumented immigrants coming into this country, I am also acutely aware of the fact that there are some farms and ranches in my community that use undocumented immigrants to work on their farm, and they're able to send money back to their families. I also have family members that are not white. They're Mexican or they have brown skin, and I have friends that are worried about getting stopped by the immigrant control, like the immigrant enforcement, ICE, and they are here lawfully. They have they have their green cards. They have the ability to be in the United States. Okay. Do I think they need to be being stopped? Does my 18-year-old niece need to be stopped because she's brown? No, that's ridiculous. Also, what are we going to do about the open borders? We are one of the only countries in the world that has open borders. You go travel in other places, and even if your visa expires by one day, you have to leave the country and you will never be allowed to come back again. So while I'm a fan of, helping other countries out, helping other people out, and like humanitarian crises, this kind of goes a little bit against some of the rhetoric that we hear in the news that says, hey, United States is a terrible place to live. It's awful, and it's this, that, and the other, and we're so oppressed. If we're so oppressed, why are there so many people trying to come here? Okay. Back to farmers, though. Taking away the cheap labor that most Americans, well, it's not that we don't want to do it, but it's like we can't afford to live if we work for $7 an hour. And there are some places in the United States that still have federal minimum wage, which is, I think, $7.35. That's what I worked for when I was in high school, and that was 15 years ago. It's slightly ridiculous. So, funding. USDA funding has been canceled, so grants is out. What are we going to do? How is this going to negatively affect our farmers and our local communities? One last thing that Trump has done that's going to impact my community directly is the tariffs. There is a big farmer here locally, and he has some farms down in Mexico as well. And if we increase the tariffs on imports from Mexico to the United States, that's going to be a problem for our local farmers, again, that are trying to make a little bit of profit. Talk to any of your friends that know farmers, or if you know a rancher, like it's hit or miss year to year whether or not you're making profit. Again, I'll put a shout out to the Farm and Food Forum. It's like farmers and ranchers have to think a little bit outside the box. And this year we had a wool producer that really thought outside the box when her buyer for wool was like, sorry, we're not buying anymore. We're outsourcing to another country. Okay, so cheap labor really does affect the quality of our products that we have in the United States. And if you look at our food, if you look at our clothes, these are all things that historically were produced by someone else's hands. And water, food, clothing, shelter, all of that. Okay, so don't love. Again, there's some benefits with the funding freeze and then cutting these programs like USAID, but it's also going to negatively impact my community. IVF, in vitro fertilization funding. Trump wants more kids. It gives people the benefit of having more children. And the gift of having a child is like nothing else I've ever experienced in my entire life. It's indescribable to someone that doesn't have a child. Fertility treatments, often you need 2-3 of them before you actually are able to get pregnant. And let's say you're even able to carry that pregnancy to term. We're talking $12,000 to $25,000 a pop. A lot of people take out second mortgages on their home so that they can have a child. And only a quarter of Americans that have some kind of coverage are able to get infertility coverage to begin with. Trump wants to change this. He originally ran his campaign on saying, hey, you guys, we're going to make in vitro fertilization free for everybody. And while that sounds like a good idea, like the nuts and bolts of things, that's a difficult thing to just give away for free. And free is such a loaded word anyway, because free in this world in the United States means the taxpayers are then going to pay for it. Okay, so we have to take everything into consideration on the downstream effects that it has. Does that mean I want to gatekeep someone being able to have a child? Absolutely not. But also, IVF treatments aren't solving the problem that we have with fertility. There are lots of issues with fertility, and even the room that I'm sitting in right now, brand new build, has carpet that I can smell that's off-gassing right now. That is an endocrine disruptor, okay? It's plastics. Plastics are a major problem. So, we're going to talk about the scientific method while I'm wearing my Make America Healthy Again hat, okay? The scientific method is the ability to question, okay? And I learned science. I love science. I'm a scientist at heart. I love running experiments, asking a question, and seeing if I can find something to either support me or tell me I'm wrong, okay? So obviously I'm wearing my MAHA hat. I am a huge fan of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. The reason being is the most important thing to me is medical freedom and informed consent. And the reason that matters so much to me is because my brother was vaccine injured when he was 18 months old. I don't know specifically which vaccine it was. In my own research, I suspect that it was the Tdap mixed with the Haemophilus influenza B, which had a little bit of mercury back in the 90s. It no longer does. We're going to talk about that though, because I want to talk about the things that people are so worried about RFK. I'm literally not worried at all about him being the Health and Human Services director. If you've ever listened to him talk, which many people that I speak to, even in my own profession, are pretty against him. And he's anti-science and he's anti-vax and he's this and he's that. I'm a scientific method person. Let's ask a question. Asking questions isn't anti-science. Saying something is safe and effective over and over and over and over and over again is called propaganda, and saying the science is settled is literally anti-science. Like, science is never settled. This is what my developmental biology told me when I was in college. She's a really smart lady, still works at Western Colorado University in Gunnison. This is what she said. Today, we can be 99% certain of something in science. And tomorrow we find out something that blows that certainty out of the water. And now we've moved on to the next piece. Okay. Remember, the earth used to be flat. It's not flat anymore, right? So people died because they thought that the earth was round, and they were murdered and quartered in a public space. That is no longer what's happening, because we realized, the earth isn't flat. Oh, and by the way, the earth isn't the center of the universe either. The sun is. So while I'm giving like ridiculous examples comparing science changes, and we need to be open-minded to being able to ask questions, which is the first thing in science, the scientific method. Okay. So, one of the things that people have to say about RFK was he has no medical background. He has no business being the Health and Human Services director. The last two Health and Human Services directors were both lawyers. And let's see, was this Alex Azar was actually a former pharmaceutical executive. So I want to talk about conflicting issues there. I'm going to say that being a farm executive is a conflict for health, because you're never deficient in that statin, you're never deficient in the metformin, you're never deficient in the GLP-1 medications that are super popular right now, okay? Well, I'm not against medications. I do think we need some serious discernment when it comes to pharmaceutical manufacturers, all right? And they are causing a lot of harm in this country. So let's talk a little bit more about so this piece. What is the background that RFK has that people are so concerned about? Oh, well, he's going to be benefiting from suing vaccine manufacturers. He's an environmental lawyer. So this is the story. If you've listened to him speak at all, you've heard him give this story. So he's an environmental lawyer. He cleaned up the Hudson Bay in New York, which was full of contamination. And he happened to be looking at mercury. Okay. If you've ever met someone with a vaccine injured child, what does my mom have to benefit from saying that her child was vaccine injured? Nothing. It spiraled my mom, in fact, and I saw it cause a lot of negative effect on her health. These other moms that I've met, other parents that I've met, like they have nothing to benefit from saying, hey, my son went in for a vaccine and then the next day had a febrile seizure and was never the same again. That's the most common story you'll hear from a vaccine injured parent or a parent of a vaccine injured child. So he's studying mercury, which, by the way, there's no safe form of mercury, not even the mercury that's in amalgam fillings, which are becoming less commonly used, but they're still used, especially in poverty-stricken areas, which there's a lot of those places in Colorado still. So he's approached by some mothers that have stacks of research on mercury. And I want to say right now, there's only one vaccine that's manufactured for U.S. use that has mercury in it. It's called Thimerosal, and it's the multi-use influenza vaccine that we get every year. So you can ask for a single use. I don't know that all pharmacies carry a single use thimerosal-free flu vaccine, but that's one way to get around the thimerosal. It's an adjuvant, it's a preserving agent, but also mercury is a neurotoxin amongst other things that it does as well. So moms approached him and he said, okay, I'm going to start looking into this, because it's like these moms, they've got these times on their hand, they're stay at home, they're reading the data. Well, they're not scientists, which is a huge criticism that often comes of these mothers that are, bringing these stacks of research papers. Like, you don't need a degree to learn how to understand the data. Like, you can start figuring out, and anymore, you got YouTube University, like have someone explain medical statistics and scientific statistics and understand that yourself. Honestly, you're probably better off than getting a college degree anyway, because there's so much bias that goes into our education in academia today. Okay, so talked about thimerosal. The important piece is here in 2001, any of the childhood vaccines minus the multi-use flu have been removed. There's no more thimerosal in childhood vaccines. That's often still something that people misunderstand today. That was removed in 2001. All right, so science is never settled. We need to be able to ask questions. While I understand that Andrew Wakefield's research on the MMR in 1998 was retracted, I will remind people that The Truth About Drug Companies by Marcia Angel, who's a medical doctor, and The Sickening by John Abramson, another medical doctor who's written about the fraud that happens in both higher academia. We're talking the Journal of American Medical Association. I'm saying, hey, I don't trust anything I read anymore. Can I understand what's going on here? Am I going to look into the authors? Where's their funding? Who's funding the program? And nonprofits, I don't care if the nonprofit says that they're like trying to solve muscular dystrophy or whatever it is. I look at everything with an eye of discernment and I lean back. I'm skeptical of everything. And, some people are going to say, hey, that's not a healthy approach to take. I say we need to all be very skeptical of things and listen to our own self. I'm not outsourcing what I know and what I understand to someone else to tell me what to do and tell me what's healthy and right for me and my family. I want to understand. And to me as an naturopathic doctor, that's my job too. I direct people to resources to help them make decisions that's best for their family. My opinion, my perspective isn't that. Objective data is there. So these two medical doctors that have written, I highly recommend, if you have not read either of these books, I encourage you to do so, because that tenure professor at some fancy university gets handed a stack of cherry-picked data on whatever we can't even say this about vaccines because there's not really good data on vaccine safety, but the stack on the newest, greatest drug that's now $20,000 a month for weight loss, stack of data that's cherry-picked, that's missing adverse events, and we're just not going to include those. I just need you to add you and a couple students' names to this, and that does happen, unfortunately. So while I'm a big fan of scientific data and I love digging in PubMed and getting like real nerdy about things, we have to have some skepticism. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in right now. Science can be bought today in 2025. And so here's my hope with RFK. I have a couple things. First and foremost, I hope he repeals and overturns the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. So we can actually hold vaccine manufacturers, which are a product. Let's not forget, it's a product. If I have a lemon car, I can sue the manufacturer because the airbags didn't go off and I broke my face, right? Like the vaccines companies do not have this. We do not have this luxury to go after them. And in fact, the Supreme Court that decided on this act in 1986 said that vaccines were inherently dangerous. Okay, but this was back when there were like a reasonable amount of vaccines on the childhood schedule. Today, by the time a kid is 18, they get 72 shots, which is a lot. Okay, well, all these vaccine preventable illnesses, blah, 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 they're supporting my immune system, and that's how I support my immune system, and we're going to freak out about a small outbreak of measles in Texas. Well, you know, there is information that shows that getting acute illnesses actually supports our immune system so that we have less negative outcomes for autoimmune disorders, chronic illnesses like asthma, allergies, and eczema, and forms of cancer. So we traded acute illnesses, which can be scary. No one loves. I had chickenpox. Chickenpox sucks. Okay. It's not the worst thing though. In my opinion, do we need to have a vaccine for that? I don't really understand why we do. Okay. Let me back up. I do understand. Both parents are working. It then becomes a financial burden when one of the parents has to stay home with the sick kid because the sick kid's contagious and can't go to school. Okay. So that's a piece that we have to take into consideration here. But also chickenpox isn't the worst thing. Like it's super itchy. It sucks. Believe me. I think a lot of the fear that we have around things like measles, for example, is the fact that most doctors have never seen it in their career. So we don't know how to treat it. It's not difficult to treat. Okay. It's just like any other illness. It doesn't have a crazy high mortality rate. And, you know, I would have really loved for Peter Hotez, who is a big proponent of vaccines, to debate with RFK. And here's what he says. Well, we don't debate with anti-science people. Okay. Well, I don't like throwing people under the bus and using degrading terms that aren't actually true when we're just questioning what we've been told. Questioning science is normal and appropriate. Okay. The other thing that I hope that RFK does, and notice I say I hope, and I'm not hanging my hat on any one thing. While I may support this person, I still sleep at night. I'm not too worried about things. You know, it is what it is. If I don't get my way, whatever. I hope that we see a stop to the revolving door between the EPA, pharmaceutical companies, the USDA, and the FDA. Okay, these are organizations that are supposed to support us, the consumer. And instead, we have to prove at length that something is not safe and should be removed from the market. That's bullshit. Okay, we need these organizations to be supporting us. You know, if we have mom and dad both working and everybody's working, we're too busy over here working to even pay attention to the fact, who cares that red dye 3 was removed? That is not actually the most prevalent red dye. I want to see red dye number 40 removed from our food. That definitely has problems, and I see it in my practice with kids that have behavioral issues. Who cares about these small, here's a small little like breadcrumb win. Like it feels to me sort of like the government is like, what do I say? Breadcrumbing us. That's a like fancy psychology word that people are using on right now on social media. We're going to give you little crumbs of things so that you feel like we're hearing you, but we actually don't give a crap about you at all. By the way, there's a lot of food dyes that are in pharmaceuticals. Anyway, so overturning the 1986 Vaccine Injury Act, stopping the revolving door between, pharmaceutical executives, which include pesticides companies now, because don't forget Monsanto was purchased by Bayer in 2018. And then end direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical ads. Well, I understand freedom of speech, and that's where this kind of gets put. When you see, I call them, they're biologics, the MIBs and the MABs, the monoclonal antibody medications for this, that, the newest drugs. Almost every drug commercial that you'll see on TV today is for these types of medications. Biologic drugs do not have to go through the same type of stringent testing that other types of drugs do, because they get a shoe-in through, it's piggybacking on other drugs that have already been determined to be safe because they're also in the biologic category. So I am not an early adopter of brand new fancy drugs, and I generally just discourage my patients from doing so, and we try to choose drugs that have 10, 15, 20, 30 years of data to support their safety, rather than the newest drug that was just approved in December of 23. Okay? And also those are more expensive. They have patents, blah, 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 a lot of problems with that. But do you really need that newest drug that was patented in December of 2023 because the lady on the commercial is frolicking through a field of flowers? And that's what you see, instead of the fact that the side effects include non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer, heart enlargement. The number one selling drug in the world, Humira, is a biologic drug, and the side effects include things like lymphoma, leukemia, and heart failure. Those are not small side effects, people. Those are major side effects, okay? Okay, so the other thing people are like really upset about RFK getting elected as the Human Health Secretary is fluoride in water. Okay, well, if you love the fluoride in water so much, then you can just add it back yourself, right? So there are some problems with fluoride in water. It's a known neurotoxin, okay? It exists in the rocks and it's naturally occurring in the water, blah, blah, blah. I hear this argument all the time. It's kind of just like the aluminum as an adjuvant in childhood vaccines, which is still prevalent in a number of the childhood vaccines, and you get it shot straight into your bloodstream. It doesn't go through phase 1 detoxification in your liver, which if you eat orally, yes, there's aluminum in our food, it goes through our liver to detox. When you go straight into your bloodstream, you don't have the luxury of going through the liver to detoxify that aluminum, okay? So, oh yeah, it's naturally occurring, the fluoride. I really encourage people to watch Dark Waters and research into the DuPont lawsuit on perfluorinated alkalized substances, PFOAs. So the reason I want to talk about these is because they have fluoride in them. Okay, fluoride has a lot of problems besides just being a neurotoxin. It also is has bone issues and hormonal issues, especially for the thyroid. And this is what I see clinically with my patients with hypothyroid. We need to get you off of tap water. Fortunately, in Montrose, we don't have fluoride, so really we're just removing the chlorine from the tap water. I get them on spring water or get them to use a filter. Okay, fluoride is difficult to remove from water. Fluoride is difficult to remove from the water because it's so small. As are the PFOAs, okay? So things like nonstick pans, no wrinkles, stain resistant, waterproof, pretty much all carpet has PFOAs in it. It's great. Like, they're freaking everywhere, forever chemicals. The DuPont lawsuit was specifically on these products, okay? And they caused 6 categories of systemic issues, including reproductive issues. So going back to like IVF, it's like we really need, I'm not saying fluoride causes reproductive issues, but we have too many things muddying the water for us to make a discernment and saying, yep, this is the thing that's a problem. 99% of umbilical cords have PFOAs in them, and they're very difficult. I hope to have a family member who's a water treatment facility guy on my podcast to talk about some of these things, because they are difficult, and filters will say, hey, we remove these PFOAs, and they really don't. Like, Brit is in a lawsuit right now for claiming that. So anybody that's had dental fluorosis, okay, do you know what dental fluorosis is? That's the discoloration on the teeth. This can also happen to our skeleton as well. So RFK has talked about these types of things and the problem with fluoride in the water. So IQ issues, dental issues, skeletal issues. But wait a minute, I thought that they help with hardening our teeth. And we can argue, I had Dr. Jill on, the dentist, a while back, and we talked about fluoride in low-income areas and preventing dental caries. I'm not fully convinced that fluoride does what we've been told it does. Again, questioning the science and saying, hey, is this the best thing for our health? So having RFK in office, to me, is a sign of hope. But again, I'm going to lean back and I'm not going to lose sleep if I don't see the government, because he works for the government now, and I don't trust the government anyway, just because he's someone I like. I'm not going to hang my hat on him. Okay. Now, lastly, I want to touch on one point. Everybody's so worried about public health and he's going to take away vaccines from everybody. Again, please give the man a listen. Like, listen to him talk. He does not say anything of that nature, okay? Public health does a lot for us. They gave us seatbelts. They gave us car seats. They helped us develop airbags. They did great things. They also helped us develop clean water. As much as I don't like chlorine in the water, it helps with clean water. We don't want dysentery, blah, blah, blah. The other thing that they've done for us is they've helped us get indoor plumbing. Those are both two things that really helped, quote unquote, vaccine preventable illnesses to go on the decline prior to vaccines even coming on board. Okay. So I'm not anti-vax. I just want there to be safer vaccines. And that starts with having placebo-controlled, inert placebo-controlled trials. That does not mean we're using adjuvants as the placebo. Okay, adjuvants are things like mercury and aluminum, which are known to be irritants. And what the vaccine producers or vaccinologists say is, hey, we need something to kind of like irritate the immune system so that it can have an immune response. Without the adjuvants, it's not going to have as good of an immune response. Okay, well, let's find some safer adjuvants if that is the case. But we need to have inert placebo-controlled trials. If they're good enough for our grandparents, they're good enough for our children, and setting up kiddos that don't have a super strong immune system to begin with something that could potentially be harmful, I'm just saying, hey, like, can we have some actually good safety data? And RFK is in that boat too, because he listened to these moms that have been ostracized by the medical community, like my mom was. And so I'm pro-medical freedom. I'm pro-informed consent. Trump's done some interesting things that have pros and cons, just like any other politician out there, whether they're local politicians or federal politicians. I am a fan and curious to see what defunding the WHO does. I am excited for families that have been trying to have a baby that can't have a baby. I am saddened for my local community that is losing funding or has a funding freeze or might not be able to hire enough undocumented folks because they're not going to be here this summer to be able to harvest their corn and bring it to market. Like, there's pros and cons to everything we do, but safety in vaccine manufacturing, there is nothing adverse about that. If you found this podcast interesting, you found it controversial, which I'm sure you did, please share with someone. And the way that I'm able to do this is for you guys to subscribe and drop a comment below. Let's chat. Like, I don't claim to know everything, but let's chat. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time.
Awesome.
I don't know.
Epic. That's good.
Hopefully.
I can tell you were a little uncertain at the start. But
Yeah.
I think you picked up. I mean, it's not a normal topic for you.
It's not.
Kind of like a coming out moment, probably.
It for sure feels that way because I've had patients assume everything about me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you voted for Kamala. Oh, you voted for Trump. Oh, you voted for Bernie. Oh, you this. And really, I don't fit in any categories.
Totally.
Do I generally approve of the things that Trump is doing? Yeah. But also, yeah, it feels scary.